Hello and welcome to Man's Model Moments. Today I'm going to look at a recently released Airfix vintage classic, the Type 192 Bristol Belvedere in 1/72nd scale. This is probably the oldest tooling I've ever seen re-released by Airfix, originally dating from 1959, when my father was not even a teenager. This kit has an RRP of $15.99 in the UK, and it comes in Airfix's standard top opening box with artwork by Roy Cross from the 1963 release. I'm going to do both an unboxing and build review for you today, as people have asked for. Inside is the single bag containing all the plastic, we'll come to that shortly. Under that are the Airfix reworked instructions, and as you saw fall out of them, the new cartograph decals with their protective cover. Instructions are in the normal Airfix A4 size, with introductory information in various languages. Opening these, we're presented with more multi-language assembly guides and the first of two finish options. Because this isn't a booklet format, but actually a fold-out sheet, which is not a particularly welcome change here. Anyway, opening this up, we're presented with the assembly steps, which follow the old style of doing multiple things in one illustration. Even from these instructions, you can see this is a basic kit. With pilot figures that look very wooden and seem to be civilian rather than military. As I mentioned, you get two finishing options in this kit, though there is hardly anything between them, as they are both prototype schemes, and I'll come back to this point later. The decals are standard Airfix cartograph fare, which is to say they are excellent, and by far the best thing in this kit. You get extensive stenciling, national markings, and the blue cheat demarcation line, all of which are absolutely perfect, with super crisp printing and faultless registration. Spoiler alert, they're absolutely wasted on this kit. Let's start with the fuselage, which is moulded in two halves with minimal sprue, though with large and intrusive attachment gates. The surface is covered in delicate rivet detailing, which is actually pretty restrained, maybe even better than some of Airfix's later tools in fact. The inner surface is pretty rough, with raised moulded part numbering and ejector pin marks, and there is zero interior detail. The finesse of the riveting detail on the two halves actually appears to be slightly different between them, probably because these were, of course, all made by hand back in the late 1950s. The first of the two parts frames has a tree sprue structure, as most old Airfix kits, and it's pretty basic with some large attachment pins and basic detail, including more riveting on external pieces. The second sprue is more of the same, these two very basic airline looking pilots and more riveting detail across the pieces, including the slim rotor blades. The transparencies are separately bagged, though I'm not sure why Airfix bothered for reasons that will become apparent throughout this video. The plastic is very clear, but that's not really the issue, as I'll talk about more in the close-ups and build sections later. For now, let's just say that the pieces are very thick. So let's kick off the close-ups with that transparency. Here you should be able to see that the parts are so thick they have sink marks, warping any view through them. The main cockpit transparency is moulded in two halves, split vertically for reasons that are lost to history, and its heavy and indistinct curves heavily distort any view through it, despite the plastic clarity. This isn't helped by how very thick these parts are. Honestly, I wish Airfix had taken the time to re-engineer these completely, as they did for the Oyster and Bond Bug. A close-up of the main fuselage shows that rivet detail, which honestly I don't mind that much, and if it bothers you, it's not that hard to sand it down. What's far worse are the huge and intrusive moulding gates, which will present problems as I'll show later. Looking across the surface, the riveting detail is a bit variable in its prominence across different areas of the fuselage. There are also some small sink marks under the horizontal stabilisers, and the inside is very rough, as you can see here. The other side displays the same sort of details, and you might just be able to see the fine rim of flash present on most outer edges of the parts, though it's not terrible considering the tooling age. Again, there's the light riveting detail across the fuselage, and the same issues with the large injection gates from the sprues. A closer look at the first parts sprue gives you a better picture of the rivet detail and simplified basic parts here. That includes these two exterior engine covers and the two parts for the cockpit. The main rotor hubs are actually surprisingly complex parts for the time, and though very basic by today's standards, the moulding of these parts is impressive for a tool of retirement age. Sadly, that sort of detail is completely absent when we turn the sprue over and take a look at the cockpit components, which are about as basic as they come and have some prominent ejector pin marks too. The second part sprue shows the same sort of detail as before in the exterior for the two doors, rotors, and horizontal stabilisers. The wheels are extremely basic, with little in the way of hub detail. And here are those two pilots. You might not want to use them, but if you do, at least they will cover the large ejector pin marks on the terribly basic seats. Starting off the build, the first thing you need to do is start to clean up the parts. You've not only got to deal with the large gate junctions, but also some errant plastic here, maybe from tool damage. As well as other parts like this piece here, which looks like post-tool release damage to the plastic. And also the various areas of flash, which are small but almost ubiquitous, including on many areas that will receive parts and need opening up. As for these rotor shafts. Or here, where the horizontal stabilizer attachment point is completely closed over. Many of these areas actually need to be carved down before you can get to a point where you can scrape them with the edge of a blade or sand them. Some people will try to tell you that this is real modelling, but that's just dumb. It's boring, repetitive, and needless cleanup that just reminds me of how far manufacturers have come in over 60 years of tool development and production. We then come to putting the windows in the fuselage. Looking again at these, I noticed a big bubble in one of these, which sealed their fate, as sprue grew, and I'll make replacements for these later. So that meant I just had to join up the fuselage halves. Dry fitting these by holding each end and you can immediately see a problem. The halves don't quite meet up at the top of the middle of the fuselage, and the rear rotor mount isn't even close. In fact, it's almost amusing at how bad this is. As such, cementing the fuselage in sections working along from front to back is essential. I started at the front top rotor mount, but even the nearby lower cockpit floor doesn't have a positive fit or location with that in place, so it needs a fair bit of extra thin and patience to get everything aligned. It's then possible to work backwards along the top of the fuselage to bring things together. I then flipped everything to work on the underside. Though I did need to go back to the front to realign it. Then back to the top and the rear intake. Followed by more flipping, gluing and repeating. Once everything is together, you can then work on the rear rotor mount. With plenty of cement and bringing it together, you can arrive at a completely closed fuselage assembly. Now I did need to come in and tape the fuselage together to ensure it didn't pop out, and I did so where the two lower fuselage pieces are attached, in case any glue seeped out by capillary action. Whilst this is drying, it's a good idea to go back and check the alignment of the two pieces, especially at the front of the cockpit floor, the rear of the fuselage, and that top rotor mount. Now even with all of that, there's still a prominent seam between the two halves which needs scraping down, even after our pre-cleanup work. So here's the fuselage completely dry, tape removed and seam scraped. This is how much plastic I removed here to get a surface that can then be sanded. That's just scraping the underside seam here, and the top fuselage join across the fuselage intake and so on. We can now add the lower fuselage engine covers, which pop into place using these large pins, leaving these enormous gaps. Putting this piece in the front here, I thought it was handed as the fit was so bad. So I reversed it, and no, it's just a terrible fit, and it's more like an electrical rocker switch than a construction kit part. Now at this point I want to talk about the Belvedere itself. When I saw the example at the Helicopter Museum, I had visions of using the pictures I took to elevate this kit to a detailed representation of one used in Borneo, like this one, but the kit doesn't really look like this. I then looked at earlier examples as used in the aid and emergency or in general service, like this one, but none of them look like the Airfix kit. That's because this kit is not a production Belvedere HC1, but a prototype. These differ in a lot of ways from the production aircraft. Firstly, the front of the aircraft, including the intake, was a different shape. The cockpit windows and entrance door were changed to slide to prevent being slammed shut by rotor downwash, with prominent differences in rails and protrusions. The main fuselage door also had a window and a winch added over it. The lower engine covers were much deeper with distinctive mesh grills on them. The rear horizontal stabilisers deleted the vertical elements and instead had downwards canted winglets. The undercarriage had aerodynamic fairings over them, and there were various bulged attachment fairings added to the fuselage and the OMD probe at the front. In short, I wasn't going to be making my idea with this kit. Instead, I'm bringing you this out-of-the-box build review, warts and all, to serve as a warning to the unwary. This is why you get two options in the kit, both of which are pre-production aircraft. The issue I then have is that the box art clearly implies a production aircraft being used for troop deployment, for which this kit is wholly unsuitable. So on with the woes of this build, and the front transparency. This needs a lot of cleanup, with the large injection gate right at the front and quite a bit of flash across it. After that extensive cleanup and you come to join the two, there are two main issues. Firstly, the parts don't really align together. They're not really halves because they don't actually mirror one another or match. You align the bottom and it misaligns the top and vice versa. Secondly, the completed part doesn't fit the fuselage well at all. There is a cavernous gap at the bottom of 1 to 2 millimeters and everything is just butt joined, so I'd be really nervous about attaching this, filling it and then trying to clean it up and keep it attached to the actual model. There's also another issue here. You see that massive canopy frame line in the centre of the lower transparency on the Belvedere? No? Well, that's because there isn't one, and yet that's what you're going to get using these transparencies. This is also why I'd like to have seen Airfix re-engineer the transparency, because a horizontally split part would have resolved both this and any fit issues. Oh well, not to be. The best thing I think you can do here is to expand your modelling skills and look to cast something yourself using UV resin with the kit part as a blank using some modelling thermoplastic, or learn how to vac form one, again using the kit part as a reference. Alternatively, if you've CAD skills, create something in 3D and see if you can print it in clear resin. Honestly, anything is better than these kit parts. Speaking of kit parts, the very basic seats also have prominent ejector pin marks that need dealing with. The vertical stabilisers also have similar, which can also be dealt with roughly with an aggressive scraping. The fit of the rear horizontal stabilisers and their vertical finlets is all actually pretty straightforward, though you need to ensure the attachment slots are sufficiently clean to get proper alignment. The rotors all come together fairly easily, but where the attachment lugs and holes are all need cleaning up first in order to have any chance of them fitting. I found every hole needed scraping to ensure the lugs would go in, including having to open some up where they were completely covered in flash. A small pair of hobby pliers ensured they sat flush once located with some extra thin cement. The undersides also have holes that you might want to fill, though you'll probably have lost the will to by this point. When it comes to attaching the wheels, the holes are way too big for the axles. And given that they're the most basic caricature of wheels anyway, I found cementing them to the vertical parts of the landing gear the best option. Because of the loose fit, you need to check alignment frequently as they dry. The instructions also have a couple of mistakes in the construction of the landing gear at step 4, where they show the wrong part of piece 30 being attached to the brace, despite it being correct for part 31 on the opposite side. The numbering of the wheels is also incorrect in both this and the prior step, as 32 and 33 are not a pair, they are one front and one rear wheel. I'd have thought after all this time Airfix would be able to catch small things like this. So I decided to leave the build at this point, because out of the box this is the kind of point you're going to be left at. The rotors are attached with blue tack here, and the canopy just placed on, because there's a lot of work still left to do to this to be able to make something even approaching a serviceable Belvedere. I think my feelings about this kit release have probably come through enough at this point, but if you're in any doubt, this is a bad kit. I have 2 of these in stock at the shop, and the only reason for them not to reside there forever is if someone wants to build one out of pure nostalgia, or really wants to set themselves up for a big challenge, because I can't recommend it for anything else. There's a lot of cleanup work in this kit, which isn't rewarded by the poor fitment of parts, the desolate interior, and absolutely unusable transparencies. Honestly, the front canopy parts should be outlawed, and I only hope someone in the aftermarket space produces something to replace them. Why Airfix thought that they didn't need to address them before releasing this, even as a vintage classic, is kind of beyond me. The kit is £16, well over twice the price of the Auster Antarctic, which they did reverse engineer parts for. Both are niche builds, but asking this kind of money for a kit this bad feels wrong. The other part for me is that this is even more niche than a standard Belvedere, since it's a pre-production variant, one of a handful of aircraft made before they ironed out the aircraft's issues and standardised production, which really limits its appeal for me. It's the lowest rated kit I've ever reviewed on the channel, and that's giving it the benefit of the doubt when it comes to its decals, which are lovely and deserve more than this kit for them to grace. Honestly, if you want to model a Belvedere, Micromere are due to release both 1/72nd and 1/48 scale versions as new tools later this year, so I'd wait for them to come and buy those. Even if the 1/72nd scale kit is twice the price of this one, it'll be worth it to spare yourself the pain of this ancient relic, which is best consigned to a rose-coloured view of the past rather than the harsh reality of its inadequacies. That's all for this instalment of Man's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous, then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.